started.
The reform movement, I haven't heard about the conservative movement yet, but the reform movement just announced this morning that they're obviously not going to open summer camps, or they're not going to have their Israel trips or anything like that this summer. So it's the correct decision, I think. It's sad, but it's correct.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so hello, everyone.
Hello. Hi.
Shalom, as we say. So I want to talk today with a few insights into some other things about Shabbat. We talked a little bit about Shabbat to finish up the holiday cycle, and then move into talking about prayer. Specifically today, I wanted to talk about the structure, the origin, the structure of the prayer books, the Siddur and the Machzor, and some outlines with that, and then we'll see where we go from there. But I welcome you, and again, don't hesitate. I'm on an iPad, so I can only see 8 or 9 boxes at a time. But if you do have a question, or if you are a comment, or something that you want to add, or need further explanation about, just jump in, because I may not see you raise a hand. So I apologize for that, but don't hesitate. So last week we talked a little bit about Shabbat, coming originally out of the phrase Shabbat, that means literally to Sabbath, if you could see it as a verb, to rest, as God rested on the 7th day after the creation of the world for 6 days. We talked about various types of labor, or skilled labor, or work, and there's different terminology. We don't necessarily make the distinction in English, but there's different terminology in the Hebrew and in the Halakha between various forms of skilled labor, or work, or servitude, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and things that you can or cannot do. And within the structure, for example, whether you're still within your home base, within the 4 walls of your home, or within the neighborhood marked off by the Eruv, some different things like that. Judaism, I would make the case that whereas we frequently think of traditional Judaism as being overly restrictive, somebody's got a radio or something going on in the background.
Okay.
Yeah. We frequently think of Judaism, traditional Judaism, and the halakha as being overly restrictive. I would make the case that it's not, that more often than not.
Rabbi, hold on 1 second.
You want to mute everybody, Ruth Ann? Can you mute everybody if you can?
Now, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, let's try it this way. So, mainstream Judaism, I would teach and interpret, for the most part, has recognized, if not even decided in favor of, a more lenient understanding. When it comes to Shabbat, when it comes to practice, religious practice, ritual practice, religious observance, there are, and I go back to something that we talked about several weeks ago, when this class first got started, is that the statement, for example, is Eila mitzvotai v'chai bahem. These are my mitzvot, God says, but you should live by them and not die by them, die because of them. So using that as a broad parameter, the rabbis frequently took a more lenient approach. So, for example, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail. What's supposed to happen if you realize that it's after sunset on Friday and you haven't lit your candles? So what are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to, have a Shabbat without candles? Or do you kind of imagine that you've got candles? There's debate in the halacha and in the literature. And while the decision may be no, you don't light candles under any circumstances if it's after sunset, there are those rabbis who said no, the fact that you goofed shouldn't necessarily cause you to forfeit the experience of light on Shabbat, of God's light on Shabbat. So they always have these debates, they always have these discussions, and Jewish literature has always provided both the majority and the minority opinion, the liberal and the conservative, and I don't mean that as the denominations or the movements, the strict and the lenient. When there's debate, we always the Ashkenazi versus the Sephardi, and they look for compromise, but they'll provide both Hillel and Shammai, Yehuda and Meir, whatever the case may be. The literature is one of the reasons why the volumes of Talmud and whatever are so vast, is because everything is included. And not only all of the debate and all of the discussion, but all of the commentary about the debate. So keep that in mind. We're not the first generation to question, as I was mentioning last week, what does it mean to rest on Shabbat, for example? And what kinds of things would be considered work, or, to use the expression that I was sharing with you last week, is recreation. Don't pronounce it recreation, but recreation. What can we do in our lives on Shabbat that's a symbol of our ability to recreate ourselves, recreate our families, in a sense, on Shabbat. Okay. So one of these, overriding principles that goes along with having both the liberal and the traditional, or the strict and the lenient, is the principle of Hidur Mitzvah. Now, Hidur Mitzvah means that you can always amplify, you can always enhance the mitzvah. You can't restrict it, but you can always enhance it, do it more. Simply put, with Shabbat, if you want to start Shabbat at 12 o'clock on Friday afternoon, that's fine. You don't have to wait until sunset. You can start earlier. If you want to extend your Shabbat past sunset on Saturday night, you are welcome to do that. Matter of fact, one of the rabbis said you can do it. You can hold Havdalah as late as Tuesday at noon if you want to extend your Shabbat that long. So there's this thought of being able to enhance and celebrate in whichever way works for you, but not to restrict it. You can't start, because of whatever it might be, you can't decide that you're going to celebrate Havdalah at 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon because you've got theater tickets for Saturday night and you need to be able to drive to the theater to get there on time. So that you can't do. in that sense. So that's one of the principles that they throw out there by which we decide how we're going to observe Shabbat, or for that matter, any of the holidays. And one of the others what we spoke about a couple of weeks ago is that whether you use the phrase pikuach nefesh, which is saving a life or respecting a life. So, and the example that we talked about is on Yom Kippur, on the fast day. The question is, can you take your medicines? Can you take your pills on Yom Kippur? And the answer is very, very straightforward. It's not that you can, it's that you must. If it's a matter of health, it's a matter of preserving life, then you must put the pikuach nefesh above the notion of self-denial and fasting. So what it tells us is that Jewish law, and where all of these different mitzvot and minhagim, the commandments, the life sanctifying acts, and the traditions and the customs, where they've come from, is that there's a particular hierarchy. Shabbat and observing Shabbat, remembering Shabbat, those are the two verbs, shamor v'zachor. That remembering and observing Shabbat is very high up on the priority scale compared to other things and other of the mitzvot. Okay, so some of the customs that we associate with Shabbat. Then let me give you a little bit of insight that you might not be aware of. And let me add, well, everybody is muted, but if our administrator wants to somehow help out in unmuting or whatever. How many of you or your families participate in a custom of when you light the Shabbat candles, then covering your eyes? Not the this, but covering your eyes. Okay. And do you know where that comes from and why you do that? Somebody can somebody. It looks like Marcia's got an answer.
That's not a good answer?
Say it again, Marcia.
Say it again.
That when you do this, you're taking it in. You're not letting things affect you. You just want to be whole for a minute.
Very good. That's not the correct answer, but it's very good. And there absolutely. And if that's what because you want to block out everything else, and just bring the warmth and the light of Shabbat into your mind and into your soul, that's great. But that's not the correct answer. Okay.
Okay.
There's actually a legal fiction. If anybody wants, that's my big hint. Anyone? Okay. So, in Jewish practice, we normally say the bracha, say the blessing, before we perform the act, right? We say hamotzi before we eat. We say kiddush, berei b'riofen before we take a sip. Okay, and we say the blessing before we put on the talit or the tefillin or whatever it might be. All right. Okay. So we say the blessing, right? And then you would think that we would then light the candles. Okay. Right? But saying the blessing is what actually defines the start of Shabbat. Why? Because you might have a Shabbat where you didn't have candles. So it's back to what I was saying before. what are you supposed to do if you realize that you didn't light candles? You can still say the blessing, even if you don't have the candles, and you can imagine, you can see them in your own eyes. So saying the blessing is what defines the beginning of Shabbat, and it usually is a little bit before sunset, okay? All right. But if Shabbat has started officially when you say the blessing, then you can't strike the match to light the candles. So what you have to do is you have to light the candles first and then close your eyes so that you don't see them.
Oh.
Okay? Then you say the blessing, take your hands away, and it's a miracle. It's ot hila olam. You remember that phrase from Vishamru. It's a sign forever. It's a sign for all generations in which we can participate. But it's an example of the way that I called it a legal fiction, or that recognizing how we still want to add some sanctity and some holiness into even the most mundane acts. Okay. Steve, you look like you want to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah. How about the waving that precedes it?
Well, the waving, as I understand it, doesn't have any halachic background. It's just kind of a, may the aura, may the sweetness come and join. It's like the literature doesn't say how many. Most people usually light 2 Shabbos candles, and that kind of is what's considered the minimum. One for the Shamor commandment, one for the Zachor commandment. That's why we get 2 candles, but many people light more than that, like 1 for each of the children or grandchildren or whatever it might be. But it's a minimum of 2. But again, it's not really written down anywhere that's what it must be. Same kind of thing with the sharing or bringing everyone in together. I've never heard of an official halachic explanation for that. Now, lighting the candles starts the Shabbat, but not for the entire family. Only for the woman, or if there's no woman around, the man who lights the candles. Shabbat only starts with lighting the candles for the one who has blessed the candles. Technically, Shabbat doesn't start for the rest of the family until, and the expectation is that you would be there, but even if you're not, until your community starts singing Lecha Dodi. Okay? So the expectation is that you would be at the synagogue when they do that. But if you're not, whenever the community, so a lot of people think that it's when 3 stars come out or when sunset or something like that. No, officially the Shabbat for the candle blesser starts when you bless the candles, but for everyone else, it's when the synagogue officially says Lecha Dodi, because that's Kabbalat Shabbat. That's welcoming the Shabbat. What's the importance of the meaning behind Lecha Dodi? Because in almost every community, almost every service includes the singing of that particular hymn. It's from the mystics, from the Kabbalah. The rabbis in Tzfat, who up on the mountaintop envisioned Shabbat coming into the community as a queen or as a bride. Lecha Dodi, come, dear the beloved one. Likrat Kala, we welcome the bride. What a lot of people don't necessarily know is that the Shlomo Halevi Alkabetz, the rabbi who composed that particular song, that particular hymn, of which there are many that use a similar kind of image of the Shabbat as a bride or as a queen, but Lecha Dodi is the most famous. and it's an acrostic. Okay, sometimes if you look in the prayer book, you can see that the first letter of each of the verses the first letter might be emboldened. It might be printed a little bit larger, in good narcissistic style. The composer himself, rather than using an alphabetical acrostic, or rather than talking about God's name, or talking Yisrael or something like that, the acrostic is his name. Shlomo Halevi is each of the verses lead up to that. The important thing that I remember having this conversation with some people. I just don't remember exactly where it was. But the important thing, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that when the congregation or the community sings Lecha Dodi, that's the official start of Shabbat for the community. Now, most of you know about the custom of when we get to the last verse of Lecha Dodi, that everyone stands and turns and faces the back door. Where does that come from? Again, it's nice. It's a nice symbolic kind of thing, and that we're welcoming the bride and here and there, or that even if you're sitting in the front row, you can turn around and you can see who came to services, and hi Frida, hi whomever it might be. But technically, it's at that point, because now Shabbat is officially coming in. It's at that point that the mourners, those who have been sitting Shiva, are coming back into the community. Rather than during the Shiva period, the community is supposed to go to them. So you have your daily minyan, whatever would be at the house of mourning, at the Shiva house. But when it's on Shabbat, everyone goes to the synagogue, including the mourners. Shiva is suspended, but not until Shabbat starts. So at that point, once we've started to sing Lecha Dodi, that's when, at the end, we turn and face the door and acknowledge the mourners coming into the synagogue. It's a parallel to, some of you might know the tradition at the end of a burial ceremony, that in the traditional community, not so much in Reform, but in the traditional community, after a burial, people, the family, the extended friends, those who have come to the burial, make two parallel lines, and the mourners walk through the parallel lines, and people extend their condolences. Hamakom Yinachem Etchem, may God have compassion upon you, and amongst all the mourners of our people and the mourners of Jerusalem. That's the phrase that is said as people come in, and it's then paralleled again on Shabbat as the mourners come into the synagogue. They walk down the aisle, and as they walk through, people can acknowledge and give them the compassion statement of sympathy, if you will. Okay, so that's the importance of Lecha Dodi. At the end of Shabbat, however, we have the Havdalah ceremony, with the symbols of the wine, the spice box, the special braided candle, and then the one paragraph prayer and blessing that thanks God who makes a distinction, makes a separation between holy and profane, but not only between holy and profane, but between the 6 work days, the 6 days of labor and the 7th day of rest, between Israel and the other nations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Why, can you hear me?
I can, Lenny, yes.
Okay. Why do we use a braided candle for Havdalah?
Well, the main difference is to again to distinguish it from the other kind of candle that we would use on Friday night or on Yom Tov. It's for a very, very specific purpose. There's lots of interpretive and symbolic explanation for the weaving together of various souls, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that even though they're multi wicks, but you only have to light one wick, and then the others will be lit automatically from it as the flame grows. A lot of interpretations symbolically like that. But the main reason is to have a different kind of light experience than we have when we welcomed in the Shabbat with the plain in the one wick candle. Have anybody heard something different? Steve, you look like you wanted to say something. Yeah.
No, well, I just had another question about it may not be exactly a minhag, or it may just be a little bit of a folk practice that I somehow remember. It's a little bit non-feminist, but supposedly a girl in the household will raise the Havdalah candle to the height that she wants her husband to be.
Ah,
Some of them want a short husband.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I remember that from any official rabbinic literature, but
So it's completely unfamiliar then, or maybe it's a whole memory. It could be.
I remember hearing something like that, but it's not. It's a Baba Mitzvah kind of thing rather than coming out of specific halakha. Yeah.
I've heard having the 3 woven candles, you have a much brighter flame, and it has to do with a brighter light, ending the Shabbos to take you into the rest of the week.
That's fine. Like I said, the fact that it's quantitatively different than the candle with which we began Shabbat. And again, to represent, there are people. Each of the braids may be a different color. Whatever. But okay. And as I mentioned before, you can delay, you can postpone saying Havdalah and ending the Shabbat, but that does not what's the right word? That does not supersede. You're still participating in community things that might be on Sunday or Monday or whatever. You still go to the synagogue. You still participate in those prayers. You still hear the Torah reading on Monday morning. Things like that. But you can still extend for Hidur Mitzvah. You can still delay your participation in or maintaining Shabbat, if you will. There is debate on whether you should still use the candles and the spices for symbols if you've delayed the Havdalah, rather than just doing wine and the Havdalah, Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol, thanking God for making the distinction. They do have that that thing. The other thing, some people have heard that the Shabbat would end whether you've said Havdalah, whether you've had a ceremony of Havdalah or not. Okay. Again, what if you're in a position where it's going to be the end of Shabbat and you don't have wine, or you don't have spices, or you don't have the special candle available. Technically, if you don't say Havdalah, technically your Shabbat ends when at the evening service and the Mariv service, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. At the evening service, when you get to the first prayer after Baruch, which is the Ma'ariv Aravim prayer, when you get to that prayer, the Shabbat is over, technically, whether you've said Havdalah individually or not. Okay, that's a technicality.
Does
Somebody
that mean
said-
that you could use water instead of wasting good wine by snuffing the candle out?
You can, but you don't say Borei Pri Hagafen. You don't say that prayer over the water.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
question? Yeah. Is there any variation in the customs of Havdalah among different Jewish communities?
Oh, lots of.
That you're aware of, what the little tweaks are among the Yemenites or the North Africans or those groups?
Steve, I'm sure there are. I can't remember any offhand, but I'm sure there are. You mean more than just the melody of the prayers and things like that?
If they just have a variation on the whole theme, if they have different kind of candle or an additional custom.
I can try. I'm going to make myself a note. I'll see what I can find. I'll be glad to look that up. I'm sure there are, but I'm not aware of what they would be at this point.
Maybe because our good friend Michelle, who passed away, would demonstrate when I was leading services, I would sometimes ask him to call him up just to do Kiddush in the Algerian.
Right, in a different nusach, right.
And he actually, it was not only the melody and the pronunciation of the Hebrew, but there were some additional little things that he did. Something with even spilling over the wine a little bit into a container. Are you
talking about for Havdalah or on Friday night?
No, this was Kiddush. This was Friday night.
Okay.
I'm just assuming that the same little tweaks and variations that might occur with the Kiddush might occur with the.
I would certainly assume so. I would certainly assume that there are some, and they might be very, very important. They might be very interesting. I'm not aware of them, but I'll try to do some research and see what I can find.
And you mentioned, sort of an option of, somebody could do the Havdalah at the official ending of Shabbat, maybe a little bit later. And I just remember a song in Yiddish as performed by Theodore Bikel, Der Rebbe Elimelech.
Right.
And one of the verses, and it's sort of, there's a progression in the song. When he felt a little happy, he would call out this musician. Felt a little happier, he would call out these. And when he was feeling real happy, he would say Havdalah. I guess to not make an Avera, just to the end. And Shabbos, and he could call out all the musicians and really go to town.
Yep, exactly. Right. Yeah, I can see Bikel singing that too, kind of thing.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
the other kind of symbolic thing about Shabbat that most of us are not aware of, but when you add it, and with this I wanted to conclude with about Shabbat. Most of us are not aware of, but when you add on this layer of symbolism, a number of things make sense. So in the literature, and it's mostly in the mystical literature, the Kabbalah kind of stuff, but it also is in the there are some things in the prayer book and some references in the other, is that we are told that on Shabbat, each of us has what in Hebrew what's called a neshama yetera. Each of us carries an extra soul on the Shabbat. Okay? That and some of them, the mystics interpret one or two of the phrases back in the Genesis story about creation and whatever, that there's this extra piece of the divine presence that is with us, especially on Shabbat, and that we welcome it in. It's with us on the day of holiness. We're closer to God. We feel the divine presence, the Shekhinah, even more on Shabbat. But then at Havdalah, at the end of Shabbat, it leaves. It leaves, and we are devastated that the neshama yetera, the extra soul, is departing from us and won't be back until next week. So if you go back into some of the phrases that we remember from the beginning of Shabbat, not only L'Lecha Dodi, but Shalom Aleichem and Chama Merosh and some of the other early songs that welcome the Shabbat, you can read into them that we welcome and we bless this extra soul. We bless God's presence, who will be even closer to us on Shabbat. And then at the end of Shabbat, that's one of the things. One of the reasons why some people say we need a larger flame at the end of Shabbat, the Havdalah candle, to be able to see this neshama yetera leaving. And where does it leave from our bodies? It leaves through our fingertips. Why? I don't know if there are any doctors on the call, if they could say, but according to the rabbis, the fingertips are the last part of our human body to be created. Okay, and so because it's the last, it's the closest to perfection. I don't know if we haven't had manicures in a long time, but the fingernails are the closest to perfection. And when this neshama yetera, when this part of God who was with us over Shabbat finally leaves, it leaves right through our fingertips, which was the last part of creation. So some of you may be familiar with the notion during the Havdalah ceremony of looking at the flame reflected off the fingertips, and that's because they're saying, well, if you look really carefully at your fingertips in this particular flame, you might be able to see the neshama yetera leaving through your fingertips. That's where that one comes from. So, on the one hand, we had the covering your eyes at the beginning of Shabbat, and now we have the extra looking at our fingertips to see if we can catch the neshama yetera leaving at the end of Shabbat. So those are just some of the things that I wanted to kind of share. I don't know if anybody else has any insights or particular family customs or things about Shabbat that you might want to mention. Marcia, please.
Daughter does this. You give a prayer over each of your child. There's a separate prayer for male children and a separate part for females. That after they light the candles, they bless
on
them.
Friday
Friday night, the beginning of Shabbat.
Right, is blessing the children.
Yes.
Right. Jeanette, I see. I think.
Wait a second, Jeanette. Okay, Jeanette.
Okay, it's just about the blessing of the wine. The words Borei Peri Hagafen. is always translated as the fruit of the vine. And I got to thinking, it never says fermented fruit of the vine. So why does it have to be wine? Why can't it just be grapes?
It can be.
It can be grapes only. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You can, right. Right. It specifically, you're right. It does not say yayin. I mean, yayin is the word for wine that's back in the Bible. And the prayer doesn't say yayin. It says the fruit of the vine. So yes, you can use grapes, whether they're seed, whether they're whole, whether they're smashed, whether it's as a wine product, or just Welch's grape juice if it's kosher.
Okay. Yeah.
Want to comment?
Sure.
Yeah, we didn't talk about napping on Shabbat.
Napping.
Napping, yes. And as far as I know, there is actually a rabbinic expression. I believe it's rabbinic. Shena b'Shabbat tanug. That, sleeping on Shabbos is a special pleasure, or perhaps it's the only time you can really take a nap. If
In
you're
the
working
afternoon,
6
right?
days a week, like in the old days.
Well,
you're really
it's
taking
that
naps.
the context in which I'm familiar with it is that's to fulfill the mitzvah of being like God. God, Shabbat vayinafash, that God rested and was refreshed. So they understand that to be like to take a shluff, in the afternoon. Now they went one step further. They went from the afternoon nap. They went to what they called the Su'udah Shlishit, into the third meal. So you had your Friday night meal, you had after you came home from synagogue, you had a lunchtime, a Saturday lunchtime after you came home from synagogue. Then after your big lunch, you would take this nap, and then you would wake up, you would go back to the synagogue and have a little, usually, herring, some kind of a token meal, have some schnapps and whatever, and maybe study some Torah of some sort, and then go into the afternoon service, go into Mincha, and then into Mariv, and then Havdalah, and they would do it that way. So that it was part of the afternoon pattern, right? Yes, ma'am. Marcia.
Activities. I had a relative who was observed a little bit more than some other people I know, and they used to say he could take the kids to go in the water. Swimming was okay, and there were some other things that were okay. Why was swimming okay? Do you know of all the activities they can do?
Well, swim. There's no reason why you can't swim. The issue is how long of a trek is it to get to the pool or get to the ocean. But there's no reason why you can't. Again, that's swimming is recreational, in that sense. The overriding principle as it affects many of the decisions about Shabbat and about other things. I can come up with lots of illustrations from the other. There is a statement of presumption. Okay, you don't want to be in a position where people, the innocent onlooker, the innocent bystander, might presume that you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing. Okay, a lot of when we talked a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago, actually, we talked about some of the little customs with the wedding ceremony. For example, the rabbi can't hand I'm sorry, this is an illustration not from Shabbat, but in a wedding ceremony, the male rabbi, of course there weren't female rabbis in the time of the Talmud, or Shulchan Aruch, but the male rabbi can't hand a ring to the bride. Okay, he has to hand it to the groom. The groom gives it to the bride, for example. Okay, because if the rabbi handed it to the bride, someone walking past might presume that they're the ones that are getting married. And the people who are presuming have every right to make that presumption. The one who is presumed in Jewish law is validated to presume. So there are lots of different illustrations. So the question wouldn't be, can we go swimming? The question would be, well, how are you getting there? Did you take public transport? Did you drive there? Did you carry towels with you, or just was the towel over your shoulder? Things like that. That would be the concern why they would say don't necessarily go swimming, because if it's in your backyard, that's a little bit different. Yeah.
Oh, I seem, and I may recall incorrectly, but I seem to recall that it was something about the wet bathing suit getting wrung out, which is a little bit of an avera. Or I guess that, even when you walk a little bit, you're sort of wringing it out.
Yeah. There may be some. Right. There may be some things like that. Right.
You can't wash clothing. You can't do laundry.
Right.
I remember my mother getting reprimanded in Israel by our neighbor who turned out to be a distant relative, and this neighbor who was right across that people hang their laundry in their apartments outside like in the old days, and this lady's window was really close. She was a little bit of a she was a rebbe, and so she managed to figure out that we were related and that my mother was descended from rabbis. And once she saw her hanging out the laundry on Shabbos, and she was very upset. She said, your ancestors are turning in their graves right now.
Right.
You're doing that.
Right.
Hanging out your laundry. Yeah, it can be rough having,
Right.
Orthodox neighbors.
Yeah, but I remember when I was a kid, when I went to Orthodox summer camp, and we would certainly go to the pool on Saturday. Not a problem with going swimming.
Okay.
Yeah. So, or you stay at a hotel in Jerusalem, you see lots of Orthodox families that would be there. Yeah. Okay. Anything else about Shabbat or any of the holidays that we ran through over the last couple of weeks? Fine. Moving on. Prayer, and what I thought we would do is today is give you some background into the structure of the prayer book, the origins of the prayer book, and some things like that, but not necessarily talking about the theology. Then maybe next week we'll get into questions of theology and what some of the particular prayers might mean, both in a challenging way, as well as showing the differences, the different opinions between the rabbis and the editors and the different types of prayer books. So let's begin in this way. What you're probably aware of, but haven't necessarily put it into this framework. And I mentioned before that Judaism historically, in a literary sense, in a theological sense, in a halachic sense, Judaism has always been trying to find the right balance between various points of view. Call it compromise, call it fusion, whatever. Hello, Marilyn and Harvey, just gotcha. I see you there in the corner. So there's always been, whether it's Hillel, Shammai, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, liberal, traditional, whatever it might be, there always is this tension, and frequently, not always, sometimes it even reverts to bloodshed, but usually they can find a good compromise, and over the centuries a good acceptance of an inclusion of the various points of view. When it comes to prayer, yes, you have the prayers that come out of the Ashkenazi background or the Sephardi background, things like that. In today's world, the prayer books and the prayer modes or modalities that come out of Reform and conservative versus Orthodox, or versus the Hasidic, or versus, whatever, renewal, or whatever different kinds of denominations and streams there might be. But the tension, as it appears in the literature, is between what they call in Hebrew keva on the one hand and kavanah on the other hand. Okay, keva would be a noun that we would translate, I guess, as the fixed, the real pattern, and kavanah would be more of the private, the intentional. Kavanah is the direction, if you will, the personal. So think in terms of the keva versus kavanah in Jewish prayer as that which is fixed. You're supposed to say it in this particular way, this particular formula, these particular words, as opposed to the kavanah, which, when I'm leading services, is now we pray silently. We use, and we respond to the personal needs that we have, the thoughts, the meditations of our own hearts. We're not using anyone else's words. We're not using anyone else's phrases. We're praying to God or looking within ourselves for those pieces of prayer, I guess, that are most important and meaningful and spiritually uplifting for each of us. So there's this tension between keva and kavanah, between the fixed, what must be said, and it must be said in this particular way, or the kavanah, which is the individual, the personal, the private. And they are both present. They are both valid. They are both included in every single, doesn't matter how far back in the literature you want to go. You want to go back 15, 1600 years, you will still find in the prayer book, if you will, the Siddur or the Machzor, Siddur for daily and Shabbat and festivals, the Machzor for the high holy days, you'll still find examples of both keva, fixed prayer, and kavanah, time for personal need, personal prayer. Okay. One of the ways, as I'll explain to you, the first order of the service, if you will, before there was an official prayer book, but the first order of the service is actually very straightforward and, believe it or not, very brief. Okay, they didn't have the repetitions and didn't have that, but we start having the prayer books become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and heavier, because each community and by community I don't mean like Green Valley. I would mean like North America, or the British, or the Israeli, or the Babylonian particular community might take some representative statements of these personal prayers, like, oh, my rabbi loved this particular prayer and would always say that for this particular thing. And we are all so connected to this rabbi's phrasing, so that when they would publish a prayer book for North America, or for the British, or for the Algerian, or for the Israeli, or whatever, they would start to include some of these private prayers as the community knew them. And then, going back to the way we first started today, Hidur mitzvah, you can always add on to, you can always enhance a mitzvah, but you can't take it out, you can't limit it or diminish it. So in other words, when the next generation would go to print their prayer book, they wouldn't dare take out anything that a previous rabbi had put into his prayer book. And so the next generation, or the next iteration of the prayer book, would include the personal prayers of these three rabbis, or these three generations of rabbis, and their book would be a little bit larger. And then the next generation would print their prayer book, and it would include some of the representative private prayers of their rabbis or their spiritual leaders, and their prayer book would be a little bit larger than the previous one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My teacher and very close friend, Larry Hoffman, describes the prayer book of the Jewish people as the mirror of the Jewish soul. Okay? That if you really want to understand the Jewish people in any one point in time, you look at their prayer book. Because in addition to the basic structure that we'll talk about, all of the additional prayers that were originally kavanah prayers, they were originally private or individual prayers that over the centuries got added into the Siddur as we know it. And sometime when we're all sitting together and we have a copy of the prayer book, we can look at some of them, and I can show you this one specifically. This was originally the private prayer of so and so, the private prayer of so and so. The one example that comes to mind right off the bat is from the High Holy Days. If you remember, one of the major prayers, the Unatana Tokef, the statement of who shall live and who shall die, who by stoning, who by earthquake, who by, in our day, who by virus, who by plague, who by illness, who by hunger, whatever. And that is in every single, no matter which denomination, no matter which community you're in all around the world. It has been in all of our High Holy Day Machzorim for 400 or 500 years now. But it was originally the private kavanah, the private statement that came out of one particular encounter in Germany. But because it spoke so strongly to so many people in so many different places, everyone has decided to include it, and now it's part of the keva. It's part of the fixed liturgy of the High Holy Days, and no one would dare take that out. Okay, so that's point number one, is understanding the way that our prayer books, whether it's the Friday night, Shabbat, weekday, or even the High Holy Day, how they're structured, both with keva and kavanah, most of it being keva, most of it being kavanah. The keva, the established part originally was very, very brief and very very short, and we can identify it. So where's the prayer book come from, if you will? Well, the literature actually starts as a collection of some of the Psalms and some of the biblical quotes, mostly from the Torah, but some of them came from other books of the Tanakh, other books of the Bible. Those quotes that were recited or sung at the time when the temple was in existence, when the priests and the Levites, the Kohanim and the Leviim would bring their sacrifices. And one of the things that we like to do, some of you who have been to Israel might have had this experience, is you can still go to where the steps in the steps in the southern section of the old city of Jerusalem that led up to the Temple Mount, and you can still climb those steps and be singing. Of course, the melodies are a little bit different, but you can be singing some of the same psalms. They're the Shir HaMa'alot, the songs of ascent. That as we go up those steps, and if you have enough imagination, you can picture the priests and the Levites and the Israelites bringing their sacrifices and going up those steps towards the Holy of Holies to bring their sacrifices. And that's where the liturgy actually starts, with some of the psalms and some of the phrases. Here's another one that you might sound familiar to some of you: Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzivaot. Okay, so that's holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of God's glory, which was recited at the dedication of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem in the right around 3,000 years ago. So that's where the collection of earliest liturgical pieces, I can't call them necessarily prayers. And next week we'll go into, again, the theological component, the spiritual component of the prayers. But so after the temple is destroyed, and then several hundred years afterwards, when Judah, the prince Yehuda HaNasi, edits the collection that's called the Mishnah, which takes all of the laws out of the Torah, the mitzvot, and the customs and the ceremonies as they were practiced amongst the people. In the Mishnah, especially, there's given the order of prayer that included in pretty much the same wording that we have it now. Okay, although again, there may be a couple extra phrases here and there that have been added onto it. Nothing taken away. Again, you can always add on, but you can't take it away. So the first section, and the technical word for the sections of the prayer book or the sections of the service in English, the technical word is the rubric. So the first rubric of the prayer book would be the Shema, okay, which in the Mishnah times we recited twice a day. Now it's recited 3 times a day. But the Shema, and when they talk about the Shema, they mean the Shema and the blessings of the prayers that accompany it. So that's the prayers of nature. That's thanking God for the Ahava Rabbah, for the great love that God has for us, and that continues through the Shema and the V'ahavta. That's all one particular rubric. That was the first rubric. The second rubric is what we sometimes refer to as the Shmona Esrei, which is 18 prayers. Again, initially, the wording was much more abbreviated than the way we see them today, but we could certainly identify and go through the list of the 18 of the Shmona Esrei as it appears in the Mishnah. And then the third piece of this public liturgy. Again, they didn't have a book yet, but the third piece was the reading of Torah several times a week, Monday, Thursday, and Saturday, in public. And it would be read in Hebrew. We're not sure exactly whether it was chanted or read, but it was also as well translated into the vernacular, because most people didn't speak Hebrew. They spoke Aramaic, or they spoke Greek, or they spoke some other language. So there was, in addition to the Torah reader, the Baal, we call it Baal Koreh, there was a Meturgaman. There was someone who would translate what was going on. We don't know whether it was word by word, phrase by phrase, paragraph by paragraph. We don't really know. But any of you who have ever done any kind of translation, especially if you're translating something that you're hearing orally, know that you can't help but add your own little twist to things, okay? Or if you can't really think of exactly what the correct translation might be, you might come up with something that's a little bit different. So again, recognizing the need that, or recognizing that the Meturgaman, the translator, might be twisting the truth or misleading the people a little bit. They would have both the original Hebrew as well as the translator teaching at the same time. So that was the order already as known in the Mishnah, which let's just date for the heck of it. Let's say 200 BCE. And then we continue on and into the time of the Talmud that goes then over the next 500, 600, 700 years as it gets refined. And there's the Babylonian form, and then there's the Jerusalem Palestinian form of the Talmud. And then after that is when the community is really spreading out all over the known world at the time, and you had the time period of what they called the Geonim. So you might see the terms the Tanaim or the Tanaitic, T-A-N-N-A. A Tana is a teacher or a rabbi from the time of the Mishnah. And then you might see the Amoraim, the A-M-O-R-A-I-M, and the Amoraim are the rabbis from the Talmud or from the Gemara. And then the next generation would be the rabbis who are known as the Gaonim. Now, a Gaon in Hebrew is a genius kind of thing, or a highly respected leader. And it's the Gaonim, whether they're in Babylonian, whether they're in North Africa, whether they're in Europe. It's the period of the Gaonim, which is after the Torah, after the Talmud has been now starting to be not published in the way that we can identify it, but there are handwritten editions of the Talmud. But the Gaonim already in the 700s, 800s, 900s, they start to put their prayer books, if you will, having the keva, the formulistic the formulistic wording that we were talking about, as well as their own personal prayers, their own interpretive prayers, and they start to be promulgated and shared around the world. The prayer book, if you will, the Siddur, and the first one to use that term is in the 9th century, coming out of Babylon. The head of the yeshiva, of the academy in the city of Sura, in Babylon is Rabbi Amram, the Gaon Rabbi Amram, and his Siddur, his prayer book, is considered the primary one, the first one, if you will, that's published as the prayer book for the Babylonian community. It's handwritten, and for its first 500 years, a little bit more of existence. It's a handwritten document. The first printed copy doesn't appear until 1486 in Italy, in a city that some of you may have visited, or the name you might be familiar with. It's in Italy, and the city is Soncino, Soncino. The printing press, the Jewish printing press in Soncino, was for several hundred years the most well-known Jewish printing press. So that even some of you, I know that some of you from the Saturday morning Torah study use the Hertz commentary from Joseph Hertz, who was the chief rabbi of the British Empire. That's published by the Soncino Press. It's the descendants of the same publishing house from Soncino, Italy, back in the 1600s. So Rabbi Amram publishes the first Siddur. Then the next is, about 100 years later, is the Sadia Gaon, Rabbi Sadia Gaon, who follows Amram as the head of the academy in Surah, but Sadia includes not only a commentary about Amram's Siddur, but his commentary is in Arabic, and so the prayer book, Sadia Gaon's prayer book, is now, it was going to be used not only in Babylon, but it's going to be used in North Africa and other areas where they speak Arabic. That was his intention. The first Machzor, the first High Holy Day prayer book as a separate book, is in France in the early 1200s. That's Rabbi Simcha Vitri, Vitri, who was a student of Rashi's, one of Rashi's disciples. Some people say he was one of Rashi's sons-in-law, but I'm not sure about that. But that was in France. That's the first published Machzor that we're aware of. So that's the structure, and that's how far back we go with, again, the Keva as it starts. Starting with the Shema, with the Shmona Esrei, the 18 blessings, and a public Torah reading several times a week. Then they're adding on to it is all the private prayers of individual rabbis or individual communities, and then the minor changes that initially were being made for the High Holy Days as they appeared. Okay, let me just do a couple more minutes, and then we'll be able to call it quits for today. So the pattern as we had it, the keva, the fixed pattern into the 1500s, basically recognized that there are, I think most of you know, there are three traditional daily services, right? There's the morning service, there's the afternoon service, there's the nighttime service. It won't call it the evening service. There's a nighttime service. Scholars will, the rabbinic explanation is that we do the morning service because Abraham would offer his prayers in the morning. We do the afternoon service because there's the reference to Isaac going out to pray in the middle of the afternoon. That's before Rebecca was brought to him while he was praying. And in the nighttime, the service is for Jacob, for Yaakov, because he always prayed when he laid his head down and he had his dreams. et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But more likely, the three identified services are because there were 3 times during the day that the priests and the Levites would offer their sacrifices. There was a morning time when they would bring sacrifices. Then there was also twilight, late afternoon, and twilight. And then late at night, when they would offer their prayers or recite some of these psalms that we were talking about earlier, when they would burn the remains of the daily sacrifice in the temple. They would clean off the altar and remove all the remnants there. So those were the three services. The pattern stayed the same. The Shema and its blessings, the 18 prayers, and the Torah reading, and then after that they started adding on to with concluding prayers. We'll talk about that next week, and where Kaddish comes in, and things like that. You remember about a minyan, right? So when they're talking about not only the difference between the keva, the formulistic prayer, and the private prayer, but between an individual's prayer, what the things that you can say by yourself, or the things that must be said in community. Okay, Kaddish is, and there's debate about this, obviously, but Kaddish, Baruch Hu, the Kedusha, the holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, Kadosh, 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 right? And Torah reading are the things that traditionally had to be recited or studied in a community. Now, what defined community? A minyan. And just in our lifetimes, you know how a minyan has been redefined, right? Okay, minyan used to be 10 men, 10 adults, then they questioned, well, what if you don't have and they compromised a little bit. You might have heard the thing about that, nine men and a Torah scroll, right? That's a much later thing. The actual statement was not nine and a Torah scroll. It was 9 and a bucher. That's a bachur. That's a boy, which is defined as between ages 6 to 13. I don't know why they chose 6, but 6 to 13. 13 is when we become bar mitzvah, whether there's a ceremony or not, but at 13, you're considered an adult for a boy, okay? Age 6 might have been, it's already late to be learning how to read for them, but the statement was 9 men and a bucher who could hold, not read, but could hold a book of the Torah, not a scroll, but a chumash, a book, a Torah book, like the commentaries like we use on Saturday morning. So eventually that somehow got moved into 9 men and a Torah scroll. The Torah scroll can be the 10th. So there was a redefinition of what constituted a minyan, and now in our day it's reconstituted again for 9 men and women, or women that constitute a minyan, or 9 plus a Torah scroll, if you will, is pretty much how most communities around the world identify it today. So that's where I think I'm gonna hit the pause button for today, and then we'll continue with more details about the structure of the services, what some of the prayers mean, what the whole notion of prayer is in the community, some things about the origins of Kaddish and how it's used. Those are the things that I wanted to talk about next week, and then we'd start to head towards looking at some of the other sacred texts of Jewish literature. Whew. Deep breath.
Rabbi, I've
Yeah.
heard that you can use a tree for part of a minyan. Is that
A
true?
tree?
Tree.
Who is that, Lenny?
Yes.
I have not heard that one.
Steve, have you heard it?
No, that you can use it. I'll see if I can do some looking or asking around, but I have not heard. You know, I'm guessing, Lenny, but I'm guessing that it has something to do with the fact that a Torah scroll is referred to as an Eitz Chaim, is referred to as a tree of life. And so it may be that somebody said, well, if we don't have a scroll Eitz Chaim, maybe if we're standing by a real Eitz Chaim, that would be good enough. Maybe. I'll see what I can find out.
Thank you.